These two little boys were the perfect example of how sometimes the real danger isn't lurking outside, it's sitting right across the dinner table. On the night of November 26, 2001, a quiet evening in Cantonment, Florida, erupted into chaos. A frantic 911 call sent firefighters racing to a home engulfed in flames. First responders rushed in, expecting to find a tragic accident, maybe even a desperate attempt at escape gone wrong. But as they made their way inside, what they discovered was far worse than a fire. Lying motionless on the living room floor was 40-year-old Terry King. His body was twisted unnaturally, his head bashed in with such force that his skull was shattered beyond recognition. The fire, now clearly an afterthought, had been set to cover up something much darker. Terry hadn't died in the flames. Instead, he had been murdered in cold blood. But as investigators processed the gruesome scene, they quickly realized something even more disturbing. Terry's two sons, 13-year-old Derek and 12-year-old Alex, were nowhere to be found. At first, the situation seemed like an unspeakable tragedy. A father dead, his children possibly kidnapped or even worse, trapped inside the burning house. But the truth that unfolded over the next few hours was something no one could have expected. When authorities located Derek and Alex nearby, the boys didn't run. They didn't cry. They didn't even hesitate. Instead, they calmly confessed. They had taken a baseball bat, crept into their father's room while he slept, and repeatedly beat him until his skull caved in. And then, as if that wasn't horrifying enough, they set the house on fire in an attempt to erase their crime. At first, their reasoning seemed simple. They claimed their father was too strict, that his punishments were too harsh. Spankings, rules, a home with too many restrictions. That was why they did it, they said. But something about their confession felt off. Their words were rehearsed, their emotions strangely absent. And then, just as quickly as they had admitted to the crime, they changed their story. Now, they said they weren't acting alone. A new name surfaced, 40-year-old Ricky Chavis, a local man who had been a family friend. According to the boys, Chavis had manipulated them, convinced them to kill their father, and after the crime, took them in, washing their bloody clothes and coaching them on what to say. He had given them a place to stay, a place where they wouldn't have to follow rules or face their father's discipline. But when pressed for details, the story changed yet again. Suddenly, Derek and Alex claimed that they never killed their father at all. Ricky Chavis had done it, they insisted. He had beaten Terry to death, then forced them to take the blame. Each new version of events contradicted the last, leaving investigators struggling to separate truth from lies. But then, a chilling revelation came to light, one that would shake the case to its core. Alex revealed that his relationship with Ricky Chavis wasn't just that of a family friend. According to him, Chavis had manipulated him into believing they were in love. He described a twisted dynamic where Chavis, a grown man, had taken advantage of him, convincing him that they shared something special. With every revelation, the case became more unsettling. Was this the story of two boys rebelling against an overly strict father? Or were they victims themselves, manipulated by a predator who had used them to carry out his own dark agenda?
Did you write some notes and letters about how you felt about Ricky Chavis?
Yes, sir.
Let me show this Memorial States Exhibit number 10 for identification purposes. Is this your handwriting?
Yes, sir.
Before we begin to dissect every inch of this case, let's take a moment to understand the King family first. Terry Lee King was born in Florida on April 17, 1961. He met Janet Little at a young age, and by the time Terry was 23, the two had started living together. They went on to have two sons, Derek, born in 1988, and Alex, who followed just 14 months later. Life wasn't easy for the young couple. Financial struggles weighed them down, and by the time their boys were just toddlers, things took a turn for the worse. Their relationship fell apart, but even after breaking up, Terry and Janet continued living under the same roof for about 2 years. During this time, Janet gave birth to twins fathered by another man. Despite their split, Terry attempted to co-parent all 4 children with Janet, trying to make the best of a complicated situation. But raising 4 young children with limited resources became overwhelming. Desperate for a solution, the couple turned to the Heritage Christian Academy, a church-run institution that provided shelter for struggling families. The director introduced them to the idea of open adoptions, assuring them that their children would live with new families while still staying in touch with their biological parents. Believing this was in their children's best interest, Terry and Janet made the heartbreaking decision to give them up. Soon after, Janet moved out of Terry's home, leaving him behind to start over. Terry picked up another job, but it paid little, and he was barely getting by. 8 months later, another blow hit the family. The church shut down, unable to afford the costs of caring for the children. The 4 siblings were separated, each sent to different families across the state. Derek and Alex, once inseparable, were now miles apart. Alex, in particular, struggled. No matter how much his new family tried, he couldn't adjust. He cried endlessly, mourning the loss of his father. His distress became so unbearable that his foster parents ultimately sent him back to Terry. The boy clung to his father like a lifeline, refusing to be apart from him again. While Terry worked, Alex would sit quietly in the lunchroom playing by himself, and at night, he made a makeshift bed by pushing 2 chairs together, anything just to be near his dad. Meanwhile, Derek took a different path. As he grew older, his rebellious streak intensified. By the year 2001, Janet received a call from his foster parents. They could no longer handle him. They were at their breaking point, and just like that, Derek was sent back to Terry, reuniting with his younger brother. Around the same time, Janet had moved to Lexington, Kentucky, after marrying another man, while Terry had finally reached some stability. He had bought a rental home with a large garden, creating what seemed like a fresh start for his boys. Derek and Alex were enrolled at Ransom Middle School, and at first, things seemed to be settling down. They were bright kids, performing above average in their classes. But just as life started to resemble some kind of normalcy, everything unraveled. On November 16th, the boys vanished. Terry reported them missing, frantic with worry. Days passed, and then he received a phone call from his own children. They told him to stop looking for them, but Terry refused to give up. Frustrated by what he believed was police inaction, he even went to the local news, pleading for help. Then, on November 24th, there was a breakthrough. Derek was found wandering near a wooded area in Pace. The next day, Alex resurfaced, returning home. Neighbors saw the 3 of them together, preparing to leave the house to visit a friend. It looked like things might return to normal. Later that night, they came back home. But within hours, their house was engulfed in flames. Firefighters rushed to the scene, but what they found inside was far more horrifying than the fire itself. Authorities quickly pieced together the gruesome truth. The attack had happened in the dead of night. Terry had been asleep in his recliner, completely unaware that his own children were lurking in the shadows. Derek, gripping an aluminum baseball bat, struck the first blow, then another, and another. It was a ruthless, frenzied assault. The man who had fought so hard to keep his sons together was left unrecognizable. His skull had been shattered. As his lifeless body lay there, the boys set the house on fire, hoping the flames would erase the evidence. But fire doesn't destroy everything. Instead of seeking help, Derek and Alex fled. They didn't go to the police or a family member. They ran straight into the arms of Ricky Chavis, a man who had been lurking in the background of their lives for some time. Chavis wasn't just a family friend. He was a convicted felon with a troubling history. While Terry had been busy working hard as a single father, Chavis had been keeping a watchful eye on his boys, offering them an escape from their strict household. His home was their hideaway, a place where rules didn't apply. Investigators soon uncovered disturbing details. Chavis had more than just a casual friendship with the boys. He had introduced them to alcohol and marijuana, blurring the lines of authority. But the most unsettling revelation came from Alex himself. He confessed that he and Chavis weren't just friends. He claimed they were lovers. Chavis had manipulated him, convinced him they were in love. Authorities found letters, love notes written by Chavis to Alex, diary entries from the young boy professing his devotion to the 40-year-old man. It was clear this was grooming, and it raised a terrifying question. Had Chavis orchestrated the murder of Terry King? To understand just how deep Chavis's influence ran, you have to understand who he was in their lives. Every neighborhood has that one house, the one where kids gather, where rules are flexible, where no one asks too many questions. For Derek and Alex, that house belonged to Ricky Chavis. To some, he was just a friendly neighbor, the guy who let kids hang out at his place, play video games, and escape their troubles. But to others, there was something unsettling about him. Rumors swirled. Over the years, multiple minors had come forward with allegations of inappropriate relationships with Chavis. Yet, somehow, nothing ever stuck. As a father juggling work and raising two kids, Terry King had no idea about Chavis's past when he first allowed his sons to spend time there. As a struggling single father, he saw it as a blessing, someone willing to watch over Derek and Alex when he was working long hours. But the relationship between Chavis and the boys became too close. Prosecutors had a tangled case on their hands. Two minors accused of patricide, a felon with suspicious ties to them, and a defense riddled with inconsistencies in statements of two young, angry boys. Alex took the stand first, his testimony retelling a horrific tale. On the night of the murder, he claimed, Chavis had sneaked into the house while Terry was asleep. The brothers had been woken and led outside, told to wait in the car while Chavis carried out the evils that he had kept hidden all these years. It wasn't until they reached Chavis's home that he revealed the truth. Terry, their father, was dead. The crime, he insisted, had been for them. The alternative, he allegedly warned, was far worse. Terry would have never allowed them to live with Chavis, even if it meant taking their lives himself. As the jury absorbed the disturbing details, Derek King supported his brother's version of events, though his emotions overwhelmed him. He spoke of how Chavis had promised them a better life, a life where they would be free, taken care of, and given everything they wanted. Yet, as he tried to put into words the gravity of what had happened, his composure shattered, which revealed the confusion of a child caught in the midst of something far beyond his understanding. With the prosecution's case laid out, the defense turned its attention to one crucial element: the confession. When the boys had first been arrested, they had admitted to the crime, offering chilling descriptions of their father's final moments. The defense seized upon this and argued that their detailed account clearly showed they had been present during the attack, not waiting outside in Chavis's car as they now claimed. The jury deliberated, reaching a decision in a short time. However, the verdict was sealed, its contents hidden until the conclusion of the second trial, the one in which Alex and Derek King, still barely more than children, would stand accused of the same crime. As the trial of the King brothers commenced, the two young defendants now sat in the courtroom in their best clothes, no longer just witnesses but accused murderers. The prosecution put forth an argument backed by tangible evidence that Alex had harbored a deep resentment toward his father and had convinced his younger brother to act. The motive, they argued, lay in Alex's infatuation with Chavis, a man who had fed him fantasies of love and freedom from his evil father. This was backed by the letters that were found at the scene, one of which read something like this: "My life used to be cloudy before I made friends with Rick. My ultimate goal in life now is what his is. It is about sharing your life with someone else's. Before I met Rick, I was straight, but now I am gay." Unlike before, Derek did not testify, but Alex once again took the stand. The court listened as the prosecution introduced the deeply unsettling letters written by the boy, in which he described how Chavis had changed him, how he no longer saw himself as straight, how his ultimate goal in life was to be with the older man. These letters, the prosecution argued, showed the dangerous and strong influence Chavis had over Alex, an influence firm enough to push him toward murder. The defense, however, turned the focus back to Chavis. They painted him as a manipulative predator who had lured the boys into his grasp, exploiting their troubled home life and preying on their vulnerabilities. He had given them gifts, let them indulge in forbidden pleasures, and most importantly, convinced them that Terry King was the enemy. To Alex and Derek, he had been the savior they thought they needed, until they were left alone to take the fall. The jury weighed the conflicting narratives carefully. Were these two boys, still so childlike in their behavior, truly capable of such a heinous crime on their own? Or had they been merely pawns in a far darker game? The final answer came swiftly. In just 5 hours, the verdict was in. Alex and Derek King were found guilty. Their knowledge of the crime scene, their shifting testimonies, and their own confession ultimately convinced the jury that they had been present when their father was murdered.
Case number 015612B. Verdict. We, the jury, find as follows as to count 1 of the indictment. Guilty of second-degree murder, a lesser-included offense, without a weapon. We, the jury, find as follows as to count 2 of the indictment. Guilty of arson as charged. So say we all this 6th day of September 2002, foreperson, Lynn Schwartz. State of Florida plaintiff versus Alex King, defendant. Case number 015612B. Verdict. We, the jury, find as follows as to count 1 of the indictment. Guilty of second-degree murder, a lesser-included offense, without a weapon.
Yet the court also seemed to acknowledge the complexities of the case. As most children their age prepared to return to school, Alex and Derek King prepared for a very different kind of future. A future inside the walls of Florida's juvenile detention centers. They had entered the world as victims, suspects, and pawns in a deadly game. And now they would pay for a crime whose true mastermind remained a mystery in the eyes of many. In an unconventional move, the prosecution tried both Chavis and the King brothers for the same crime. Chavis was acquitted, despite the damning letters and his attempts to cover up the murder. The King brothers, however, were convicted of second-degree murder on September 6, 2002. But in yet another twist, the judge overturned their convictions, citing violations of due process. Rather than face another trial, the prosecution and defense reached a plea deal. Both Derek and Alex pleaded guilty to third-degree murder. Derek was sentenced to 8 years, Alex 7. But was justice truly served? Why did nobody consider the disturbing relationship of a minor with a convicted felon? Almost nobody would ask this question. Derek and Alex King entered prison as children and left as men. Long after the trials had ended and the headlines had begun to fade, the King brothers still had those who remained invested in their fate. Among them was journalist and writer Catherine Medico, whose interest in their case had shifted from professional to deeply personal. What had started as research for a book had transformed into an emotional bond, particularly with Alex. She had spent months exchanging letters with him, their conversations stretching over long phone calls. But it wasn't until late 2002 that she finally met him in prison. From the moment they were face to face, she felt an instant connection, as though he were a child in desperate need of care. Catherine was not alone in this sentiment. In different corners of the country, strangers had been drawn to the case, outraged by the way 2 children had been thrust into the adult legal system. Their frustration turned into action, culminating in the formation of the King Brothers Trust in 2003. Lisa Drew Alton spearheaded the initiative, determined to provide support for the boys once they were released. It was, she believed, a gesture of faith, an assurance that despite their past, they would not have to navigate their future alone. Among those who became involved was Dan Daly, a widower and freelance writer from Texas. Through online discussions about the case, he had connected with Lisa, who suggested he send Derek books in prison. A simple act of kindness turned into something much more when he received a heartfelt thank you letter from the boy. That letter marked the beginning of an unexpected friendship. Over time, they corresponded frequently, and Daley made the long drive to Florida several times to visit Derek behind bars. He was struck by the boy's openness, the way he spoke about his guilt without hesitation. For Daley, the relationship was not about the notoriety of the case, but about helping a young life find direction after a tragic past. As Alex and Derek spent their formative years behind bars, these unlikely supporters waited for them on the outside. But there remained a looming question. Were the boys worth saving? Would they emerge from prison rehabilitated, or would they become hard-hearted criminals like so many before them? When Alex King finally walked free, he did not dwell on the past. At 19, nearly a year and a half out of prison, he presented himself as someone who had left the darkness behind. He had built a new life, one he never imagined possible, with a family that embraced him as one of their own. Prison had changed him, though for years he had felt emotionally numb, disconnected from reality. The full weight of his circumstances had not sunk in until he made a reckless mistake, one that nearly cost him his freedom all over again. In April 2005, with 3 years remaining on his sentence, Alex and another inmate attempted an escape. Their plan had been amateurish at best, stuffing their beds to make it appear as though they were still sleeping, then slipping into a classroom where they attempted to climb through the ceiling. The plan failed, and they found themselves right back where they started, caught before they even had a chance to make it beyond the walls of the facility. The consequences were severe. Arrested and booked on new charges, Alex faced the terrifying possibility of an additional 15 years behind bars. It was then that Catherine Medico rushed to see him, shaken by the news. When she expressed her worry, his response was dismissive. She wasn't his mother, he told her, but she refused to accept that. In her eyes, Alex was as much her child as her own biological children. Something in that moment shifted. The next time she received a letter from him, it was addressed simply, "Dear Mother." From that day forward, he never called her anything else. Derek was released at the age of 20 in 2009 after serving 7 years. Alex was freed a year earlier in 2008 at the age of 18. But freedom didn't guarantee a new beginning. Alex King's life had been anything but ordinary. From a troubled childhood to a high-profile murder trial, his past had always loomed over him like a shadow he could never escape. And now, at just 35 years old, his story had come to a tragic end. For years, Alex struggled with drug addiction, a battle that, according to his uncle Greg King, had consumed him. The last time Greg saw Alex was 5 years ago in Pensacola. He had urged his nephew to enter a rehab program, but Alex found it difficult to handle confinement yet again. Whether it was prison walls or the strict rules of rehab, he always found a way to run. On April 14th, Alex was found unresponsive in Missoula, Montana, after a drug overdose. Doctors at Providence St. Patrick Hospital fought to save him, but the damage had been done. It wasn't his first overdose in recent weeks. In fact, the doctor treating him recognized him immediately. Alex had already been in the hospital several times before. This time around, however, he wasn't so lucky. His heart had stopped. Medical staff worked desperately to revive him, but after days on life support, Alex King was declared legally dead on April 23, 2024. His family gathered for a final goodbye, though not in person. His last moments were witnessed through a screen, a heartbreaking farewell from miles away. He had once been the boy at the center of a case that captivated the nation, the child who made a confession that changed everything. But in the end, Alex King was just another lost soul, caught in the tight grip of a past that never let him go. And Ricky Chavis? He remains incarcerated, serving a 35-year sentence, not for murder, but for false imprisonment and being an accessory to the crime. The murder of Terry King also ignited a media firestorm. Were the boys victims of abuse or cold-blooded killers? A book, A Perversion of Justice, A Southern Tragedy of Murder, Lies and Innocence Betrayed, argued that they were innocent. But Assistant State Attorney David Rimmer had his own take. There will always be people who believe Derek and Alex are innocent, just like there will always be people who believe that Michael Jackson is innocent. The murder of Terry King was not just a local tragedy, it became a nationwide sensation, dividing public opinion and sparking heated debates about justice, abuse, and manipulation. One of the most controversial takes on the case came from authors Catherine Medico and Molly Barrows in their book, A Perversion of Justice, A Southern Tragedy of Murder, Lies, and Innocence Betrayed. The book painted the King brothers not as cold-blooded killers but as victims, children caught in a web of manipulation and discrepancies in the legal system. It suggested that the justice system failed them, raising a question that left goosebumps. Were the boys innocent all along? Years after their release, Derek and Alex King sat down for an exclusive Dateline NBC interview in a special titled Second Chances. For the first time in years, the brothers reunited on camera, their faces now marked by time and the weight of their past. They reflected on the choices that led them to that fateful night and the scars they carried from it. The case was also the subject of Evil Kin, Season 1, Episode 5, titled Deadly Darlings. The episode delved deep into the chilling bond between the King brothers and the sinister influence of Ricky Chavis. The legal battle that followed was examined in American Justice, Season 12, Episode 21, Blood Brothers, the Derek and Alex King case. It presented the twists and turns of the trial, leaving audiences to decide, were these boys monsters or merely pawns in a much larger, darker game? Even decades later, the story of Terry King's murder remains as unsettling as ever. Some still believe justice was served, while others insist that the full truth has yet to be uncovered. What do you think should have happened? If you like the way we create these videos and you want to help bring more cases like this to light, hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives. Thank you once again for watching.